Good afternoon. My article obviously is touching on the subject of the day, COVID-19 and a rolling sudden stop. The internet collapsed the world and shifted it into real time. Many people will forget that there was a time before the internet. Paul Virilio says, with every natural disaster, health scare, now comes the inevitable information bomb. Live feeds take over real space, and technology connects life to the immediacy of terror, the ultimate expression of speed. What is clear now is that the Malcolm Gladwell moment has definitively arrived. The tipping point moment in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass. It's the boiling point. It's the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. It took only 4 days to go from 200,000 to 300,000 confirmed cases. This is from Remy GMI, who is a tremendous resource in this space. Daily growth has exploded in the past 3 days. That's Remy again. And that speaks to what I wrote about on the 16th of February when I said viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. The number of countries with at least 500 active cases is increasing every day. Remy again. And finally, I expect the global death count to almost double in the next 7 days. 24th of February, and before WHO and Dr. Tedros declared it a pandemic, I said what is absolutely clear now is that we're dealing with a virus that has turned exponential and non-linear and is a pandemic. The images coming out of Italy are apocalyptic and heartbreaking and contaminating our minds like the virus itself. This is a photograph of army trucks coming in to collect the bodies because so many people have died. This is a photograph of a makeshift hospital in Bergamo. And Bergamo's crematorium is working 24 hours a day, but can't burn the bodies fast enough to keep pace with the toll. Many of the relatives of the deceased, trapped in quarantine, are unable to pay their last respects. This week, a Milan undertaker told La Repubblica newspaper, "People we never meet ask us to send a kiss to a grandfather or to comb the hair of a sister in a certain way. Others push a family photo under the door and beg us to place it in the hands of someone who did not survive the virus." That naturally took me to John Donne, for whom the bell tolls. No man is an island entire of itself. Each is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thine own or of thine friends were. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore send not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. The zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood, and the zeitgeist of 2020 is simply indescribable. The saliva of COVID-19 patients can harbor 500 billion virus particles per teaspoon, and a cough aerosolizes it into a diffuse mist. Many of us sit and watch the daily White House briefing. Jena Friedman said, "A reality TV star botched the response to a global pandemic, and now we are all imprisoned in our homes and forced to watch him daily. It is a monstrous joke of sycophancy." The Tsinghua University professor Xu Zhangrun said this about the CCP. "What is thriving, however, is all that ridiculous red culture and nauseating adulation that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn." The professor could equally have been speaking about the Trump White House. Balagis said, "The virus may be the most dangerous adversary America has ever faced. It's like the US was invaded. The normal defenses fail, it can't be bombed, bank accounts can't be frozen, unbreakable morale, no supply chain, lives off the land, infinite reinforcements, fully decentralized." I wrote, "A non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact." To watch the daily briefing is to understand that the control machine has a novice, a hubristic ignoramus in charge of the console. And the New York Stock Exchange cannot tolerate it a moment longer. The NYSE is in fact perfectly correlated to the president's incompetence. US stocks hit new coronavirus low, erasing more than 3 years of gains. That's from J.S. Blockland, and are down, limit down this morning as I walked in. And it took me to the Hollow Men Mistah Kurtz, he dead. A penny for the old guy. We are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw, alas, our dried voices when we whisper together are quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass or rats' feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. For thine is life is, for thine is the. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. The bull market is dead, and Trump cannot resuscitate it. What's certain is that the whole global economy has been hit by an insidious, literally invisible circuit breaker. Asia Times, Pepe. Policymakers somehow still believe in their linear minds that more free money, more rate cuts will resuscitate the patient, which is like a patient anesthetized on a table. Remember when money printing and stocks were supposed to be positively correlated? Welcome to the real world, tweeted Tabby Costa. and his chart needs no further explanation. The US is set to throw $2 trillion at the anaesthetised patient. The UK is to put forward a £350 billion emergency support package. European governments have announced economic rescue packages worth a combined €1.7 trillion to combat the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. The numbers are eye-popping, but the truth of the matter is this. The global economy is coming to a sudden stop. We are moving from a world of hyper-connectedness to a world of quarantine. A complete quarantine is the only way to vaccine this 21st century world of ours from what Bill Gates recently described as he said of the coronavirus, has started behaving a lot like the once-in-a-century pathogen we've been worried about. The price of crude oil is perfectly correlated to the COVID-19 sudden stop. Interestingly, agriculture has overtaken precious metals as the best performing commodities since the outbreak of COVID-19. This chart is from Ole Hansen. Supply chain disruptions are starting to emerge. Wheat saw its best week last week in 9 months as consumers stock up on bread, pasta and cookies. I still believe gold will soon turn viral to the upside, and I'm looking for more than $2,000, and when the moment arrives, like the viral moment arrived, it will be very, very breathtaking. Now let's turn to Africa, where I find myself, and it's definitely in the firing line. I wrote an article on March 5 for the Africa Report, Debt, Virus and Locusts Create a Perfect Storm for Africa. And I suggest you have a look at it for purposes of a background to what I'm saying. The year started off bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. The African Development Bank said the outlook continues to brighten. Real GDP was estimated at 3.4% for 2019, is projected to accelerate to 3.9% in 2020. I said when I wrote that article, those forecasts are now defunct and it's only March. At that time, the virus had to date barely made landfall on the African continent, with only 5 countries reporting infections. But I wrote, a virus is in its essence non-linear, exponential and multiplicative, and it would be a Shakespeare-level moment of hubris if policymakers were to pat themselves on the back. At that time, diagnostic kits were only recently availed, but Jack Ma, congratulations to him, has sent a whole bunch of diagnostic kits. And I said then, if South Korea had tested the same number of people as the entire African continent, they too would be reporting single-digit cases. I quoted epsilon theory. We all know what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom, we're in the cluster phase. I was asking about the violence of the blowback from the negative economic feedback loop phenomenon. I quoted the virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, and therefore it is a black swan. I said fantasy predictions of a V-shaped recovery in China have been dashed, though China continues to promote that prospect. China cannot just crank up the factory because that will risk a second round of infections. In my opinion, I was talking about Angola, Congo, Brazzaville, DR Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Zambia, Nigeria, and South Africa immediately springing to mind as being in the line of fire. but the entire continent is, in point of fact. Adesina was saying debt is not a problem, it's very bad debt, that's a problem. Well, that was a wrong diagnosis. Debt is a very big problem, unfortunately, as are rising debt service ratios. Then the rand, I said, was in free fall, has a lot further to fall. Nigeria's oil revenues cratering. I said a currency devaluation is now predicted and predictable, and they've half-heartedly devalued it a little. And I was also mentioning the risks of the locusts. Well, firstly, COVID-19 has now made landfall on the continent. Let there be no doubt about that. As I said, we know that the coronavirus is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative. Look at this back of the hand diagram by TVRVB, who said that, basically he was predicting April and May as the boom moments. This is frightening. Africa's on the exact same fast rising trajectory as Europe. It started later, but it's the same accelerating path. A lot of people felt because of the weather or the genetic makeup, somehow it would be different. It isn't, and it is an iceberg. So these numbers you're seeing, first 40 days for Africa and Europe, the issue is, what is the number, the real number? I said to Geoffrey York, who posted that Africa CDC comparison, that Africa is a steeper trajectory because the number of tests are so much lower than in Europe. The current number of cases, 1,258 as at Sunday, needs to be multiplied by a factor of 25 to 100 to get the real number. We're looking in the rearview mirror when we see these numbers. Bill Gates, this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China. And I don't want to play down what is happening in China, he said. The negative feedback loop is double-sided. One side is an overwhelmed healthcare system. If you think Bergamo is overwhelmed, think of what's going to happen here. The other side is the economy. Eurobond yields have exploded. Zambia 4,000 plus basis points over, Angola 1,727 basis points over, Gabon 1,454, Nigeria 1,248, Cameroon 1,196, Ghana 1,188. So basically the Eurobond market is closed. Of course, there is an IMF facility, and I think everybody is going to be knocking at that door. Currencies are in free fall. The rand is at a record low and could go as low as 20 against the dollar. The shilling fell to the lowest on record as well. Nigeria's central bank weakened the official exchange rate on its website by 15% to 360. Naira per dollar from 307. The rate for foreign portfolio investors was also altered to 380 from 366. I turn now to what has been a sweet spot for most sub-Saharan African countries, which was inward remittances. That topped into sub-Saharan Africa $40 billion in 2019. And the question is, how much do we have to haircut that number? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 25%? I think it's more than 25%. So point number one, because there's going to be massive job shedding as the hyper-connected world economy goes to one under quarantine. Airlines are no longer going concerns. Fly Ethiopian's losses from coronavirus reach $190 million, according to Habesh, as the impact of the coronavirus global travel hurts Africa's only consistently profitable airline. The epidemic has cost African airlines $4.4 billion after thousands of flight cancellations. For Africa, international bookings have plunged about 20% in March and April, with domestic bookings also declining. Tourism is stopped out for the whole foreseeable year. The flour industry is another one that's nosedived. Kenya's flour industry, and this applies to Ethiopia as well, the largest exporter of blooms to Europe, is staring at a disaster. Farms are exporting only 20% of the 60 tons of cut flours that they would normally send daily to markets, including the UK, Netherlands and Germany. UN's Economic Commission for Africa reckons the continent's average GDP growth rate will fall to 1.8% this year from 3.2%. My calculations show that it will be negative. And it would not be an exaggeration to say we're staring into the abyss of a zombie apocalypse. Thank you for listening.